call the meeting back to order and ask all those willing and able to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone who is here in our audience, as well as everyone who is with us online as we are officially live streaming our meetings beginning this evening. I will do brief introductions. I am Bob Cook, the board president, and to my left is
Bill Wright, Superintendent of Schools.
George DeMarteau, attorney for the district.
James O'Brien, board member.
Hi everyone, Emeris Kaczynski, board member.
Good evening, Nikki LaPlaca, board member.
Pat McHugh, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources.
Dina Wilson, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction.
Good evening, Board Superintendent, Finance and Operations.
Good evening, Nelda Massell, Assistant Superintendent of Student and Family Services.
Hi, Sarah Warren, Student Representative.
Good evening, May Abdullah, board member.
Good evening, Di McBride, board member.
Hi everyone, Karen Flanagan, School District Clerk.
Good evening, Jennifer Laird, board member, vice president.
something like that. Okay. So at this time, we have no changes to our agenda and no announcements that I'm aware of. So we will go right to our report from our student representative.
Hi. So this week we've had multiple E-Day meetings so far and students keep attending, which is really exciting to see. Also this week we have students participating in various events, and some including the seniors are having a drawing competition on their parking spots with chalk, and the winner gets free ball tickets. Underclassmen are also planning on writing positive messages on the sidewalk with chalk as well. Also this week the student body voted for a new junior representative, so that was fun. We are planning on adding a water fountain for the gym outside, and all of the council members are working really hard on trying to get that into effect. And we are coming up with ideas to promote environmental awareness, which we will be selling water bottles at the Powder Puff game, and we are also trying to put positive messages and coming up with a green board to inspire other students. Lastly, we are brainstorming ideas to stop using styrofoam for lunch and come up with an alternative. The amount of work and passion the students have put in the environment is really amazing, so that's really cool to see. That's all for now.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we will open our public forum. This part of our public forum is an opportunity for people to speak to us about any item that is not on our agenda this evening. We do ask folks to try to limit themselves to 3 minutes. If it gets excessive, we do have to cut people off. But we do have 2 people that are scheduled to speak tonight, and then we can open it up to anyone else who may wish to talk to us. If you have something that you want to address us about that is on the agenda, we would ask you to do that at the time that comes up on the agenda by getting our attention. So our first speaker is Kevin Yost. Kevin, come on up.
Good evening, Kevin Yost, 1474 Middle Road, Town Henrietta. I graduated from Rush-Henrietta High School 25 years ago. 30 years ago, I was in 9th grade at the high school taking earth science, and another student had just transferred into our class from another high school, Penfield High School, and he asked the teacher if the class could go outside and look at the rain gauge, and the teacher said, well, unfortunately our school doesn't have a rain gauge. And of course nowadays, recently 9th grade and earth science are now at Berger and Roth junior highs. And if I understand, last night checking the course catalog on the district website, earth science is now 8th grade, which for the past 50 plus years has always been junior high or middle school. So I had an idea, maybe there could be a rain gauge and maybe some other weather equipment like the little wind whirly gigs with the cups on it, at the 2 junior highs in the yard. And on either side of the main science wing there's a little courtyard, one between that and the technology wing, between that and the other science rooms and the main hall at Roth, and and perhaps maybe, if it's possible, the Rush-Henrietta Education Foundation could finance that rather than taxpayer dollars. And of course, you'd have to have a tall chain link fence with a padlock gate to keep vandals and thieves out of there. And the teachers would have to unlock the gates to let the class in, and probably would have to have some sort of a sidewalk from the doors from the outside of the science wings out to where the equipment is in the fence that they would be contained in. And I'm also pleased from what I just heard the student representatives say, and I was an alternative student representative myself, that there's now going to be a drinking fountain outside the gym at the high school. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Hughes. Appreciate it. Our next speaker is Sheila Buck.
Good evening. How are you? Sheila Buck, President of the Rush-Henrietta Employees Association Teachers Chapter. The budget season is upon us as the Board of Education begins to look at priorities in the budget, and considering that for nearly the last decade, the Rush-Henrietta has had a surplus at the end of each year. The RHEA teachers would like to bring to the attention of the board some thoughts we hope you will consider in the process of forming a budget for the 2020-2021 school year. Class sizes have grown at all levels throughout the district. At Leary, special area classes are once again 1.5 times the size of the largest homeroom. In addition, the concentration of special education students has made it difficult to meet the needs of all students in the special areas, as they are mainstreamed during these times into ever larger classes. All of this, and since the reconfiguration, primary special area classes were shortened by 5 minutes. The RHEA hopes the board will consider the burden to create masterful lessons with an ever larger and needier group in art, music, and physical education. Class sizes have risen at Berger, too, where classes have 26 to 28 students, and study halls are at maximum capacity as students are not signing up for the electives that were planned during the reconfiguration. Special education issues occupy much time and discussion. Speech services are strained, with the groups exceeding the district's recommended size. Speech-language pathologists are being pushed to the maximum, and even then are unable to service all the children in their school and complete all the work required. There is an equity issue as well, as some schools are able to provide SLIP kids or speech-language improvement program kids, while other schools can only service mandated students. At schools where special education is concentrated, students who do not have an IEP, that would be SLIP students, but have speech needs, cannot get serviced when they can at other schools. This creates a grave inequity. As I mentioned earlier, the concentration of special education students also strains the special areas who have to service the entire school. It causes larger class sizes and limits the choices of how best to meet the needs of all students. In addition, the teacher's contract, as you know, is at impasse because the RHEA teachers know that teachers here in Rush-Henrietta, after about 17 years of employment, will make thousands less each year in salary and benefits when compared with other districts in Monroe County. In addition, during the Great Recession, teachers in Rush-Henrietta willingly reduced our future salaries to save jobs and assist the district during financially tough times. Now we find ourselves asking, how will the district plan to stand by the teachers who nurture our community's children? As the process begins, the RHEA wants to be clear that our ask is within the budget surpluses that have come each year for the past decade. When planning for the needs of our students and with recognition of the actions of teachers, the RHEA hopes the board will consider these issues in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board at this time? Seeing no one, we will close the public forum and move on to our consent agenda. We do tend to move these items pretty quickly. I mentioned it to our viewers online. So the first item is the consent agenda of items of routine nature, including acceptance of contract change orders, appointments to various organizations, the CSE, CPSC recommendations, and approval of minutes of the Finance Committee as well as the board. So I will accept a motion to approve the consent agenda, moved by James, seconded by Nikki. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, nay. The consent agenda is approved. Brings us to our personnel actions. I'll accept a motion to approve personnel actions, moved by Diane, seconded by Jennifer. Any discussion on personnel? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, nay. They are approved. Brings us to our workshop on expense report, refresher on expense reports.
All right, since we're entering travel conference season, I thought it would be a good time just to refresh and remind everybody about what the district guidelines are. The board policy pertains to employees and to board members. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes just to bring everybody up to speed, because some people may not have traveled in a while. So we'll just go through some of the highlights. But the first one is that pre-approval is always required for travel. So if you're an employee, you go to your administrator. If you're a board member, you go to the board president. So travel should be pre-approved before you embark on it. Document your expenses. Original receipts are needed. So save your receipts, unless you're using the per diem meals, and we'll get to that in a minute. Submit timely. So the expense report should be submitted within 30 days of the date of the travel, so they can get processed and reimbursed and recorded timely. Some ineligible cost, because we are a school district, there's no alcohol, tobacco, that's allowed. Speeding tickets or parking fines are the responsibility of the individual traveling, not the district. Sales tax, because we are sales tax exempt, we should not pay sales tax on anything other than meals. It's not practical at restaurants. Typically, we show we're tax exempt by issuing a purchase order, and because it's from a governmental agency, that's the vendor's proof for tax exempt. Or if you're staying at a hotel, there's a special form that you can use for tax exempt status. So please make sure you're not paying sales tax on anything other than restaurant meals. How we do in the district meal reimbursement, the board adopted this policy a while ago to try and simplify travel. It's a per diem, and it's based upon the U.S. General Services Administration rates. So you would go online, included is the link to the website for the GSA site. You go on, you pick your destination of travel, and there's rates there. So there's a total rate for meals and incidentals. So for example, in Rochester, if you're traveling in Rochester, it's $61 a day. But they also break it down by meal, because oftentimes when you're at conferences, some of the meals are included in your conference, so you would not request reimbursement if the conferences provide you a meal. Or sometimes vendors may sponsor activities, so if they're sponsoring a meal, you wouldn't request reimbursement for that meal. So the GSA rates do break it down by meal. So you can submit, if you're on the road for a day, you can submit the per diem rate and you don't need receipts. But if you did receive a meal that you did not pay for, that should be deducted from your per diem rate. Now, on the GSA website, there is a first and last day of travel reimbursement. We don't use that. The board has set their own policy. So if travel begins prior to 10 a.m., you're eligible to claim all 3 meals. between 10 and 2, you just claim lunch and dinner, or if you start travel between 2 and 6, then you're eligible for dinner only. In lodging, we don't follow the GSA rate for lodging, because typically when our people are traveling, they're going to a conference, and the conference designates hotels that are close to the conference center. So that's considered a reasonable rate. If it's part of the hotel at the conference, that's a reasonable rate. If for some reason you're on other travel that's not linked to a conference, make sure you pick a moderate priced hotel, not top of the line. You don't have to go to the bottom of the line, but it should be a moderate priced hotel. And the last thing is, sometimes if these events are out of town, people may want to go a day early or stay a day late for personal purposes, or bring a spouse. The district does not reimburse for any of that. So if there's any incremental cost beyond what you as a district representative are incurring, that should come out of your pocket, not district expense. So that's just a little overview, a refresher for people as we're getting ready to enter travel season. Any questions?
Anyone?
All right.
All right. Well, I'll do it perfectly. Thank you.
Good,
Thanks
good.
for the refresher. All right, that brings us to our workshop on budget development.
Okay. Well, as mentioned, this is the kickoff, if you will, to budget season, even though, as I've said many times at this table, I think, I don't know that there is a budget season anymore. I think it's something that we have to think about year-round in terms of our planning and our preparation. But nevertheless, we are in the process of finishing up our program and service reviews. I think it's on, but the red light is still flashing. Because I was playing with it as
Okay, sorry
I
about
thought
that.
the same thing. So we are in the process of completing program and service reviews by department. If you'll remember, this is sort of a line-by-line analysis of the budget by department. So we will be finishing those reviews up tomorrow. And tonight, I just want to walk you through our budgeting goals and principles, and get you thinking about the essential question, which is always centered around the strategies that you'll want us to utilize as we're thinking about realizing budgeting efficiencies. So as always, our primary goal is to successfully propose and achieve an equitable, educationally sound, and fiscally responsible budget. When we talk about equitable, we're talking about giving each individual school appropriate funding based on the needs of the school. But when we talk about equity, we're also talking about promoting equity in terms of outcomes across the district, regardless of which school a child attends. We want to make sure that our budget is educationally sound, meaning that it allows us to continue to build upon the quality of current programs and services that have demonstrated positive outcomes for students. And we also want to make sure that the budget is able to fully support the identified district improvement priorities. And then lastly, fiscally responsible. We want to make sure that our budget-to-budget increases are manageable or reasonable. And we want to make sure that our property tax increase does not exceed the tax cap. And then, as I said at the beginning, the essential question is really, what strategies do you want us to consider as we have to close a structural budget gap, especially in future years. Andy's going to be talking about the 5-year forecast and our reserve utilization plan in detail. And so, a piece of positive news is that we anticipate at this point, and things certainly can change in a New York minute when we're talking about the school budget, that. But, we are in a better position, at least to start, than we were last year. We have a gap, but the gap isn't as large. But this is a structural gap. It's going to be the same conversation every year. It's just a matter of how large the gap is. And as Andy talks about the 5-year forecast, and we begin to look at the out years, that number grows significantly. So that's what we have to consider. But like I said, it's positive news to start, and that the number is a bit smaller than it was to start last year. So at this point, I'm going to turn the conversation over to Andy to talk about the 5-year forecast and the reserve utilization plan.
All right, thank you, Bo. In your package, there's a spreadsheet that says 5-year financial plan. And please bear in mind, this is at a high level. As Bo mentioned, we're just in the process of finishing up the detailed program and service review. And so then we'll cost out what that program and service review yields from the ground up. So what we're doing here is at a high level, using the cost drivers as we know them. So the first year, the budget for this year, 2019-20, is balanced by law. When we go to the voters in May for approval of the budget, it has to be balanced. And so when you look at 19-20, it is balanced. That means the revenues in the top half equal the expenditures in the bottom half. But one of the items that you'll look, the last revenue item, we call appropriated fund balance, and that's a combination of our reserves and how much money is left over from the prior year. As you know from your personal experience, it's impossible to predict exactly every dollar that we'll spend over the upcoming year. So there's estimates in the budget. We try to estimate a bit conservatively because we don't want to have to cut programs mid-year. There'd be nothing worse than taking away an AP opportunity or a sport or a music opportunity mid-year. So we do try to budget conservatively, and what that means, we often end up with a bit of a surplus at year end. And so we call that appropriated fund balance, and we can carry that over the next year to help balance the budget the next year. When we get into 2021, when you look at the revenue drivers, we're looking real property taxes, which are almost 2/3 of our total revenue for the budget. We estimate 2.8%. And typically, as you know, our tax cap by law, it's the lower of 2% for inflation. However, there are some exceptions. The exception we usually get the benefit from is for real growth in the district. If there's new construction, that can be added to our levy. So the last few years, that's been about 0.8%. For 2021, right now, through August, the inflation rate is trending about 1.5%, so we might be under the 2%. But this is also the year the VA hospital comes online on the assessment rolls. So it came onto the rolls, you could see in May, and that's part of the reason why our tax rate did fall this year. So we're hoping that'll help maintain our rate, our levy growth at 2.8% this year. And then in 2021, 22 and 22-23, you can see it's 3.5%. And that's where we're hoping that the significant RG&E project that they started construction on will start to kick in. That really is a 4 or 5 year construction project, so it's hard to say what years it'll kick in. But it will provide significant growth for the district, which will be a benefit to our levy. So for our projection purposes, we put that in the 2 years after 2021. And then after that, it goes down to our normal 2% tax cap plus about 0.8% for growth. So that's the major revenue assumption. And non-property tax items, for the last few years, the sales tax, the major thing there is sales tax. For the last few years, that has been higher than what we budgeted. So for 2021, we'll bring that level up to what we've been realizing. But then we flatten it out because, as you know, sales tax is driven in a large part by car sales. And at some point, well, they've already started to flatten out. At some point, they may decrease. so we're not too optimistic there. In state aid, it's always tough to project state aid. We're projecting 2.5% for 2021 as we start to normalize, because some of what our major growth in state aid is from the expense reimbursement aid, which is about half of the aid. So during the reconfiguration, we added some significant expenses, so we're starting to normalize that. So we're hoping for 2.5%, because the other half of foundation aid, we typically get less than 2% because we're not considered a high need school. So for the out years, we're projecting 2% state aid. So that gives us, as you can see, revenue of between 2.5% and 3%. But then when you look down at the expenditure line, the bottom line is we're probably averaging close to 3.5%. And so that's why we say we're in a structural deficit. When you look at the expenditures for 2021, the 3.6% growth, we're already seeing this year some unusual drivers. We're having to add an ELL teacher. We continue to get an influx of students who don't speak English as their native language, so they require additional supports. We've had a significant surge of enrollment at the primary grade, so we've had to add primary teachers. And then we did add a director of wellness and equity to support one of the district priorities. So there are a number of positions that we're not budgeted in 1920, so we're rolling them into the 2021 budget. And then after that, we're projecting typically around 3% salary growth with a little bit of turnover savings we get. So we're projecting salaries of between 2.8 and 3%. And then if you look at the non-instructional for next year, that's the last year of the big increases due to minimum wage. So when it first started, only a small number of employees were in fact affected. As the minimum wage increases every year, more and more employees are affected. So we have hundreds of employees who will be getting bumps driven by the minimum wage increase. So that's the big driver in the non-instructional personnel line. As you know, employee benefits, the two big drivers there are health insurance. Health insurance trend rates are probably around 6 to 7%. And the other big driver, New York State pension, 80% of their income is derived from earnings from what they already have invested. Because the stock market has started to flatten out, that means they're going, most likely will be raising the rates that the employers have to contribute. So when we look at that, we expect our employee benefits to grow roughly 6% range year over year. And then the other expenses really are just inflationary driven, and our debt service is based upon our actual debt payments. So bottom line, it does give us roughly 3.5% next year, a little bit higher expense growth. So we are in a structural deficit, and you can see where it says cumulative annual surplus or deficit. Even 2021, we're starting off at $1 million deficit, then that grows each of the years. The reality is we have to balance our budget, so somehow we're gonna have to close that gap. Some of it will be revenue enhancement, or some of it will be expense reductions as we go through the budget process. If we did nothing, if everything came out exactly as projected, which we know it won't, but if it did, by the end of 5 years, we'd have to reduce the equivalent of 89 positions to be able to balance the budget. But as we talked about, that process every year we go through and look at expenses to balance each year's budget. Any questions regarding the forecast? So if you look at the bottom lines, the cumulative annual surplus, $1 million deficit projected for next year, growing to 1.6 million the year after, then 2.6 million. One of the ways we can close it is through our reserves. The board has been very thoughtful in planning some of their reserves. So the next page is what we gave you is called the reserve utilization forecast. So this shows you one of the tools. If we did nothing on the expense side, how long will our reserves last before we have to get into draconian expense cuts? So when you look at it, some of the reserves each reserve by law is dedicated for a specific purpose. So we can't just use all the reserves at once to pay for salaries or benefits. They have to be used for their purpose. And when we look at workers' compensation, right now we have a $2 million reserve. We are self-insured up to $100,000 in workers' comp. So our thought is we need a minimum of probably $900,000 in there, because workers' comp payouts typically go out over a number of years. Our projection right now is roughly $800,000 to $900,000 of known payouts in the future. So we want to keep that reserve, but we could use some of that excess balance if we had to from the $2 million. The big ones that are very flexible, the ERS retirement reserve and TRS retirement reserve, because typically ERS we're paying roughly $2 million a year, and ERS is around $2 million a year we're paying out, and TRS around $4.5 million. Those reserves are easy to build into a budget because we have such large expenses. The employee benefit reserve is really dedicated for contractual benefits the employees do upon separation or retirement. So there are accrued vacation days or accrued 6 days. So we can't use it for ongoing benefits, but we can use it for payouts when people separate. And so we've been using about $400,000 a year, because that's about the run rate we're paying out. So that reserve will last indefinitely. And then tax certiorari is a reserve against all the lawsuits that commercial businesses bring against the town for their assessment. And if the lawsuits are successful, they typically go back 1 to 5 years. We will have to refund taxes if the court determines they were overassessed. Right now, we have about almost $8 million of outstanding claims against us, and we have reserves of $2.7 million. So you do want to keep some reserve in there in case you see a significant payout. So that way you would not have to cut a program mid-year to pay for that. But if you look at our reserves and to balance the deficit that we saw on the prior page, we have about 3 years that we could reasonably use our reserves without cutting anything before we run out of reserve money. But you could see that means in the fiscal year 23-24, we'd be in a $3.6 million deficit with no reserves we could tap. So that's when you'd have significant cuts if we hadn't started making cuts along the way, or there's always the tax cap override to get some revenue enhancement. So those are the 2 things that would come into play, and by the following year, we'd be up to $5.9 million of a gap. So you can see we definitely, the good news is we have flexibility. Even though we're in a structural deficit, we have a solid 3 years that we can manage it smartly using the reserves we have before we get into critical situation. So we have time to figure out how to address the structural debt. So any questions regarding that? And so as Bo mentioned in his budget interview, our assumption is the board still for next year would like to stay within the tax cap, because we do have adequate reserves to cover our deficit if we can't cut the full $1 million gap when we go through and look at our expense reduction. Is that a fair assumption? The board is that should remain a priority at least for the next year?
If I could just ask a different question first, I'm sorry.
Sure.
It sort of blends our 2 different pages here. One of the things that, every year we've been fortunate in that at the end of the year, our surplus is sufficient that we not only are able to meet our appropriated fund balance, we also are able to put money back into the reserves, right? And so that's one of the reasons why we've been able to pull out money from the reserves over the last few years and continue to be able to keep it on sort of a 3-year basis, because we've been replenishing those reserves even as we've been taking money from the reserves to balance our budget. I guess the question is this, and you may not be able to answer it tonight, and if not, that's fine, we can talk about it the next time, because this is a 6-month process, but Over the last couple of years, we've actually had more that we've been able to put into, significantly more to put into reserves than we anticipated because state aid was higher or sales tax was higher. To what extent do we anticipate that may well continue to occur? And if it does, is there a point at which we would be in a position to try to utilize that extra money for programmatic purposes as opposed to simply replenishing reserves? I guess,
Yeah.
long way of
Excellent
saying,
question,
can we
yeah.
still keep the reserves healthy, but also improve on our programmatic end of things?
Yes. Part of the last couple of years was driven by the reconfiguration expenses. We were a bit conservative in estimating the reimbursement we would get. So 18-19, that drove a significant budget surplus. We used quite a bit of that in the 19-20 budget. So if you look at the budgeted state aid growth, it was significantly higher than what the state said they were giving us because we were catching up from under budgeting the prior year, and we'll probably finish that process in the 2021 budget. We'll see what we're getting in, and we'll probably be able to do the same thing, budget a little bit more than what the state says we're getting as we're catching. So we're 19-20 really should close some of that, a lot of that gap. And then the other piece was the uncertainty of marketplace. We were conservative and reduced what we expected to see from marketplace, and so that generated a surplus. If we increase that pilot estimate, it cannot go in the program because we're by the formula, we have to reduce the levy. Right. So some of it, at some point, probably this year, we'll start increasing our pilot assumptions. But what that'll do is reduce the allowable levy by the amount we increase. So that cannot go in the program. It's the way the law works. But typically, we do try to budget somewhat conservatively. So we do hope we can continue to replenish the appropriated fund balance. It's just if there's significant unexpected expense, that is there basically as a buffer. So we're hoping, we think in this year's budget, we ate up some of that surplus, and in 2021 we'll eat up more, and then we'll be, in the out years, we'll be close. I mean, I hope, if you have no surplus, unless you're exactly at zero, which is very unlikely, then you're getting in a deficit, and we
Right.
definitely don't want to head there.
So I guess the word of the wise is that, even if we have a little bit more of a surplus this year than we anticipated, that we can't count on having enough money in the future for ongoing expenses. If we were to increase our budget to such an extent that disappears, we won't have the revenue to support it. So it would force a bigger deficit in out years than we show right now.
Yeah, and if you listen to the state controller, they say you should budget to your average, which means half the time you'll have a surplus and half the time you have a deficit. If you have a deficit, how do you close it? You have mid-year cuts, and I don't think anybody really wants to impose that upon our students with mid-year cuts. So we'll always budget a bit conservatively, but it is getting to be tighter and tighter.
I have a question. I just want to be sure I'm reading this right, because you know me and my numbers. And the reserve utilization forecast page, in the middle of it, it says projected reserve usage. That's what you're talking about, anticipating possibly using the dollar amount for reserves each year to
Yes.
to make it even, to
Yes.
balance the budget.
So if we did not cut any expenditures, that's the amount of reserve
Okay.
we would take the balance.
Gotcha.
But as you know, when we go through the budget
Right.
process, we'll look at areas
Right.
but yeah, if everything were status quo, that would be what we would need to use.
I thought so, but I just wanted to be sure.
Yes.
Yep, very good. Other questions? Nope. Okay. So I guess that moves us into the workshop on reserve fund management.
We pretty much much talked about it, so.
Right, exactly.
I won't take you
That
through
was
that
good.
whole document, but if you could turn to the page that has the summary of the reserves. The summarized balance sheet shows the change in reserve from the end of 2018 fiscal year to the end of June 30th, 19 fiscal year. So you can see some of the reserves are maintained flat. The only difference is we do get interest earnings in the interest stage of the reserve. So workers' compensation, we did not use any, we did not contribute any. Same thing with the unemployment insurance reserve. The big one is the retirement contribution reserve. We did take out $600,000 to balance last year's budget, but we were able to replace that plus add another $500,000. So the board at the end of last year authorized replenishing what we had used plus adding $500,000. And also, we were allowed to establish a TRS retirement reserve for the first time. That was brand new. And the board last June thought it would be prudent because that's one of our biggest expenses to establish a TRS retirement reserve as well. So we're able to fund that by $800,000. So those are the reserves that when we look at the usage plan, these are the reserves that we're drawing down. Tax certiorari reserve, as we talked about, that $2.7 million funds about 40% of our $8 million of open cases. The reality is people usually get less than what they ask for, but we prefer that number be around 50%, but we're getting close to it. And then we talked about the employee benefit reserve. That's for when employees retire, the sick day buyouts that they're entitled to or accrued vacation. And capital reserves are how we fund our building projects. We have $300 million worth of infrastructure in the district, and like all infrastructure, it needs to be maintained. And these are the funds that we use to maintain it. And there was some shrinkage there because the voters did approve capital proposition last year. Encumbrances is just how much of the prior year budget we committed to spend but did not spend. So we have to reserve that money and carry it over to this year when the spending actually happens. And then we talk about our designated fund balance, that $2.8 million. That money typically is the same money each year. We just carry it forward every year, and we hope we don't spend it. Unless there's an unusually tough year, we won't spend it, we'll carry it forward. And undesignated fund balance, that's every year. That's the same money that rolls over every year. It increases a little bit. It's not a new $5 million every year. It's the same $5 million that gets carried over year, and we add a couple $100,000 to it each year. But that's the money, the cash we use to fund the district until property tax collections start coming in the end of September. So we still have payroll and bills to pay July, August, September, and that's the money we use to fund it. If we use that money up to support programs, then we'd have to borrow and incur borrowing costs for the cash flow. And remember, that's not a recurring $5 million. That's a single $5 million that gets carried over year. So if you funded recurring expenses, it would use it up pretty quickly, and then you have a gap. So I won't take you through each of the reserves. We've been through them before, the package, but are there any questions? And anything that the board has questions about what the rationale for the reserve is? Anything that doesn't appear reasonable to the board?
I just always like reading through them because it reminds me exactly what they're for.
Yep, they are there for a reason.
Yeah.
If the board's comfortable, then we'll need a resolution to pass or approve it.
There are no questions, anyone? Okay. Then I would ask for a motion that would state, resolve that the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District adopt the reserve plan titled Strategic Plan for Use of Reserves 2019-20, dated October 2019 as presented. So is someone willing to make that motion?
Yeah.
Moved by Diane, seconded by Nikki. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll indicate aye by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, nay. That is adopted. That brings us to our external auditor annual report.
All right, with us tonight, we have Mr. Tom Zuber. So Tom, if you wouldn't mind coming up front and center. So Tom is from the Mangel-Metzger Bar and Company, Ray Wager CPA division. They're the external audit firm. By law, every school district has to have an external auditor. So they're the certified public accountants who come in and look at our books and ensure that we're complying with GAAP and that our books are fairly stated. And they also do an assessment about the financial condition of the district. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tom so he can share his finance with you.
Great, thank you, Andy. And as Andy had mentioned, that we are the external auditors, partner with the firm, been with Ray for almost 25 years now. So I've been auditing school districts for quite some time. In fact, I may see some of you in the next few weeks at the school boards. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the financial statements with another board member. So I'm excited about that. And as Andy mentioned, I'm here to talk about your 2019 audit report. And again, that financial statement, there's a lot of good information in there. It's about 61 pages long. There's our audit opinion, obviously. There's a management discussion and analysis, which is a lot of good information. Andy prepares that, and it talks about a lot of budget variances. It talks about future factors. It talks about your long-term debt and so forth. So there's a lot of good discussion in there. There's also these corporate-style financial statements and then your operating accounts. So there's a lot of very good information in there. And we met with the audit committee back on September 27th. And we probably spent about 45 minutes talking about the financial statements. And we had a very good discussion. We talked about the budget variances. We talked about fund balance. We talked about the reserves that Andy just walked through. We talked about internal controls and checks and balances. So it was a very good discussion, and we did spend some time on that. So that was back in September. The financial statements are really the results of a budget process that you started more than a year and a half ago. Okay, and these are the budget results, and I think from a financial statement standpoint, you did end the year in very good financial condition. Okay, so you continue to be in good financial health. Some of the areas that we look at when we take a look at that really ends up being the reserves and fund balance that Andy was just walking through. The district does a very good job in terms of managing your reserves and fund balance, and the communication is excellent relating to that. Not only do you have those reserves, you're using them as part of your budget process. Okay, so again, very positive from the financial statement standpoint. A couple of the key reserves that are out there, your capital reserve. Again, very beneficial reserve. You have about $10 million in the different capital reserves that you have, and as you know, that can help support the local portion of a project. Okay, very positive. In fact, you utilized about $8 million. The voters voted to have the board or the district pull about $8 million out of your capital reserve and move it over to the capital project to support some of those capital expenditures. Very, very positive. In addition, the district was able to refund it. Okay, so you did put about $8 million back into the different reserves you have. So again, very positive from the long-term financial stance. Okay, excellent job there. I know I heard Andy mention the new teacher's retirement reserve. So not only do you have an employee retirement contribution reserve, a brand new teacher retirement contribution reserve. Again, very positive. The rates have been, relatively low lately, between the 8 and 10%. All right, but if those rates spike, just a couple percent increase in the rate can be pretty significant to the school district. So a reserve, very excellent reserve to have, and the district's moving forward with that, and very, very positive. So we did have a lot of very good discussion with the audit committee and spent a little time on the financial statements. So doing a great job there. All right. We also talked a little bit about the internal controls, the checks and balances that the school district has the internal control communication. And again, the district does a very good job, you know, with part of any audit. Part of that process is to take a look at all the different processes and procedures that you have in place over your financial cycle, so your payroll cycle, your procurement process. And we spent a lot of time in there documenting the different processes and procedures. And you know, I'm pleased to report there were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. That's positive, that's where you want to be. There are a few minor procedural recommendations to enhance what you're currently doing, but overall, you know, very, very positive results on the internal control communication. Okay.
Very good. Any questions? Seeing none, I will accept a motion to accept the external auditor's financial statement. Moved by Jennifer, seconded by Diane. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, nay. It is approved. And that brings us to the corrective action plan.
Okay, so within the audit.
Thank you very much.
Tom had mentioned that there were no material weaknesses or deficiencies within the audit, but they did have a couple recommendations on some processes we could look at on documenting to ensure that we're on top of things. The first one was cybersecurity. We all know the reality of the risk of being on the internet in a modern society. Everybody who uses the internet's at risk. So they recommended documenting our risk assessment process and then the escalation process. So if we have an incident, that it's documented and who communicates what to whom. I'm happy to report that the Information and Communication Technology Director has created such a document, so we're in good shape there. They continue to work with our local BOCES, who host a lot of our servers and does a lot of the cybersecurity work. They have a consulting group that comes in and assesses our systems to make sure that we're staying on top of the security. Certainly nothing is guaranteed in this day and age, but they're trying to stay abreast of it. So, and the document they created will be evergreen as things change. It'll be updated and improved. Then the other piece that the auditors recommended, we document our federal programs. The state has gone through and started auditing. There's two major pieces that they audit. One is IDEA, which is the grant we receive for special education student support, and the other is Title I, which helps support some of our needy students. So they recommend that we enhance the documentation, because some of the findings from the state auditors around the state, that's their recommendation. So I'm pleased to report we did go through a Title I audit in May, and the auditor was very complimentary of our processes. We're still waiting for the final report, but verbally he indicated that we were the best district he's audited in a while, but he still had some recommendations that we're working on. And then, unfortunately, our budget analyst, who also does all the financial reporting for the grants, retired. So we have a new person, so we'll spend some time and we'll start benchmarking at the state level what exactly other districts are doing, and we'll work on documenting that as well. So that's what our corrective action plan is. We have responded, we'll continue responding to cybersecurity, and we'll look at enhancing our grants, and that'll take a little longer as we develop our expertise back up, but we'll certainly stay on top of that.
Okay, any questions about the corrective action plan? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion to approve the corrective action plan. Moved by May, seconded by James. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, nay. It is approved, which brings us to the ever-exciting tri-annual review of district policies. So, we will do as we usually do and go item by item and decide what we're going to do with each of these. And George, You sent us some pretty extensive comments. If you could mention them as we go along. I would say one thing, with the conversion of our policies over to board docs, a number of typos entered the process, missed commas, words bunched together. Let's not focus on those. If you have those, I know I have a bunch of them, let's just give those to Karen because those can be made easily, can be easily corrected. We don't need to focus our attention on those. There's plenty of them. It would take us all night to talk through all those typos. So let's just start through, and if anyone has a comment or concern, we will go through it. So I'm going to be fairly rapid. Code number 4323, policy 4000, 4323. Anyone?
No, that's the one. The
Nothing?
regulation. So I'm-
4323R.
I have something.
Okay.
I just noticed there's inconsistencies throughout a lot of these. One says parent, then there's parent or guardians or parent/guardians. It's not consistent within the policies, so it's something we might want to take a look at. It's something small, but it's
Right.
just not consistent through a lot of them, so.
Right, and they should be consistent. So I think that's a change that we can make without having to go through a motion.
Right.
Let's add that consistency, and
Should it be, how do you want it to read?
it should be parent/guardian, parent/guardian, yeah. And we've done that in a number of other policies before, so let's just make that a uniform change. All right, 4323R, we just talked about. 4325, anyone?
My comment here was that there's an appeal process for AIS, and it's referenced in actually 4325.1-R. And I think that it should be specifically referenced in the policy rather than having to find it through policies further in the regulation.
Okay, so where would you put that?
Well, that's part of the question. I suppose that you could include a reference in 4325 to appeals with respect to AIS should be in accordance with provisions in 4325.1-R, and just refer it directly in the body of the policy. I don't know how else you would do it other than repeat the language, which you could do as well.
Should we send this to policy just to?
I think you're
make
going to
sure
have
we
to
do
in
it
order to
the
make
right
it read sensibly, because otherwise it's going to be kind of cut and paste.
All right, so let's send it to policy.
And the place where it says ESL student, it should be English language learner.
Yeah, we have a number of changes from the Office of Instruction on the policy, and we probably should bring 4325.1 and the regulation as well.
Okay, so the regulation will also go to policy. That makes sense. And 4325R as well, to policy. Yeah, okay. That brings us to 4326. Programs for English language learners. Anyone? Nothing? Okay. 4327. (4331) summer school. I think this needs to go to policy. And the reason is I started to work on language about this, but now that we're doing summer school through Monroe 1 BOCES, that isn't really referenced in here. This is written as if we're completely doing the summer school. So I think we need to put that in here so that it's clear that we're not actually operating the summer school directly. So let's set it to policy, just get the language right. 4331 are the same thing. 4334.1. Anyone? I had just a substantive question, which doesn't have to be answered tonight, but we can get an answer back on. It doesn't really impact the policy, but it says here in the second to last paragraph that when the CSE determines the college course should be included in a student's IEP, the district will pay the required tuition and other expenses related to the course. I wondered how often that happens, how much we spend on that on an annual basis, so I mean, I've never heard of us doing that, so,
I've never seen it, but I have no idea. It could well have happened. I wouldn't know that.
maybe we can just follow up at a future meeting and let us know if that has ever occurred. I mean, it says that we can do that, so I would be curious if whether we ever actually have. Okay, but that doesn't impact the policy. 4340. 4350, I think this needs to go to policy because I don't think that this well reflects our equity and inclusion priority. So-
Dina has some language for us for that, so.
Okay,
we're ready to
great.
go.
So do I,
Yep.
so between us, I think we can figure that out. Okay. 4351, anyone?
My strong suggestion here is a need to
This
consider.
is the one. Yeah. All right, that'll go to policy?
Yes.
All kinds of work for
Yep.
you here,
I know, I'm so excited.
Jen. So I think probably 4351E1 should go to policy,
Yep.
the exhibit. 4430. 4430R. 4510.
Oh, wait,
4510R.
hold on, 4510. I was wondering if Chromebooks should be listed anywhere in here. There's talking about what we provide, instructional material including, but there's no mention of Chromebooks at all. I don't know if that's in a different policy or, but it's talking about textbooks, web applications, videotapes, DVDs, digital audio recordings, digital video recordings, on and on, Laserdisc, like, but there's no mention of whatsoever of Chromebooks.
If we would add it, I would not make it specific to Chromebook, I would
Yeah.
say student devices,
Devices.
you know.
Devices, yeah.
Thought we had done that before, but, so let's send that to policy to fix that.
Do a product.
Exactly.
4510R,
4510R, there is a recommended change from instruction under the general provisions, number 3, just being more precise about the process for approval of materials. It's really a teacher committee and program directors. The current language is kind of outdated.
okay. All right, so let's send that to policy as well. Take a look at that recommendation. 4526,
My comment here, I think, was in the third line, that it serves the best interests of learning. I'm not sure, I thought maybe best didn't add anything. Perhaps it's more limiting than intended.
I agree there, and I wondered about even restructuring that sentence, because I think it reads awkwardly. Something to the effect of serves the interest of students, promotes teaching and learning. So,
right, and I actually had a question. It didn't seem to me that this well reflects our one-to-one initiative. In a sense, it goes to what Nikki was talking about before. So why don't we send this to policy also? Forty-five twenty-six E, I think it needs to go. 4526R1. Yeah, I don't think these need to unless other people think they do.
Dina has requested that we change computer resources to technology resources and computer system to technology system. There's a few places in here where that's written that way. And also information and communication technology curriculum, ICT, as opposed to just technology curriculum, just to be consistent with our.
Okay, I think if people are comfortable, why don't we make those changes and just bring that back to a first read?
Okay. I'll give you those changes.
And that's for the R1, right?
That's for R1, correct.
Okay.
And how about 4526R2? Anyone?
My comment was in under 5, under home computers, it says organization-owned software. I don't see that anywhere else either. District-owned.
Okay, I'm sorry, Bob. on 4526.R.1, they're also suggesting that we might want to take a look at the email paragraph, just about, it says in there that certain communications by teachers via email is prohibited, that I think our practices have probably evolved beyond that. So we may want to bring this one to policy instead of just first read.
All right, rather than first read, go to policy.
Sorry.
It's like, I don't think there was much else.
R2's probably going to need to go as well.
All right, let's send R2 to policy.
They did a very thorough read.
Sorry.
All right, so that's good.
Well,
We
the
just-
technology
We just did
is-
these 2 years ago.
I know,
now.
but there's a lot.
Okay.
Everything
That's
evolves quickly.
changes.
31, field trips and student travel. That needs to go to policy. Okay.
We're
And
sending,
we'll send the
All the
exhibit, let's send the
exhibits.
exhibits to it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Policy might be meeting on
Yeah,
a
the
weekly
policy.
maybe you
Wow.
split that out.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so all of these are gonna go. That brings us all the way to. Yes, we got, there are a lot of exhibits here, folks. We're gonna send out all of them have to go.
yeah,
All right, 4531 R1, to policy. It also is about field trips. And 4531 R21, that should go to policy, because it also is about field trips. Same with R2, R.2. All right, 4531.5, athletic travel and field trips. Just this.
we have some changes
Yeah,
for
that
you.
should
This needs to
probably,
go to policy.
there's some stuff in this one, we did all the other ones.
Let's send that to policy. Yeah, we should have done it what is not going to policy instead of what is going to policy. All right, we're going to send the exhibit there too. Hey, that brings us to 4532, school volunteers.
We don't have anything on our end.
You don't have any problems with that one, Dina?
No.
Anyone else? Everyone likes school volunteers? Oh, I'm sorry. What-
I just been highlighted in one, but sorry.
You sure? Okay, so we will leave that as it is for now. Okay, 4710 grading systems. Anyone?
My question about this was trying to understand what the policy was, excused absences versus illegal absences and the opportunity to make up work. I thought that was specifically addressed a couple of years ago, and I don't see, what I kind of recall was that there's less opportunity to make up when you're illegally absent. So I just asked the question, I don't know what the thinking is or what the practice is, but I recall that there was some discussion about it, and I don't see any differentiation in this between excused and illegal absences. Someone cuts a class, so then they get an opportunity to make up the work. That's how this seems to read to me. Or maybe they should, maybe that's the policy. I just thought there was some discussion about it. Nobody's looking like there was, so I don't know.
Okay, I don't know. Anyone?
Trying to recall.
I don't remember that.
Okay, well, maybe I dreamed it.
I don't know the history, but I saw your comments and I read through that. I think in either case, there would be a concerted effort to try and get the students to make up the work.
Exactly, so I think that's why, in general, that's what we're trying to do. All right, so we'll leave that one as it is for now. Okay, 4710 R1,
We're suggesting we need to change middle school to junior high,
right? We can just make that change.
and I would add senior before high school grading. So junior high school and senior high school grading.
Right, and those are just in the title, actually, so
That's it.
we can make those without going anywhere. That's fine. Okay, 40,
Sorry.
yes.
Going back to 4710, the page before, just because George got me with this question. Where it says
You're
every
going to need to be a little bit louder, Sheila, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll use my teacher voice. Where it says every effort will be made to make up work. Is there a description of what every effort means or an explanation of what that means? Only knowing that in the schools we occasionally have students who have exceptional absences and it's exceedingly difficult, whether it's a legal or an illegal absence, it's exceedingly difficult to catch students up in work when that happens. So I was just curious, is that something that should be covered by the policy or not?
Well, I think that's something that we certainly can discuss. I think that might get too granular because you have to look at it so much on a case-by-case basis, depending on the student and the circumstances, that I think it would be hard to make a hard and fast rule. It's my opinion.
It tells you to see another policy as well. It says C 4760 for makeup opportunities. So that policy might dictate what the teacher needs to,
Right.
what effort needs to be put into that. I'm not sure, I don't know the policy on.
Okay.
It's not in our packet.
It says every effort
It's
as
in our
well.
packet.
It
Oh,
is.
does it?
4760
Oh,
is
is
in
it?
the packet.
It's consistent.
Oh, maybe I just missed it when I looked in here. Oh, yeah, I did.
It's discretionary to some extent.
And I would think it would mean reasonable efforts.
Just curious,
So,
thank you.
yeah. I mean, we certainly could say reasonable effort if that's what we think it should say, right? As opposed to make every effort. I'm on the wrong page now, so I don't even know what I'm talking about.
Around 4710 or
You just insert the word reasonable, you need
Instead
some
of
kind of
every.
limitation on it.
Right.
Every an effort, because every reasonable effort,
Every
every effort
reasonable-
needs
That makes sense.
no limit whatsoever.
Is everyone comfortable with adding the word so that it would say every reasonable effort to be made to provide students with the opportunity and assistance to make up our work? It does clarify to some extent.
Minor change or first reading?
I think it's a minor change. We're not really changing the import.
Yeah, I would agree. I think actually it's probably implied.
Right, I
but
agree with that.
I think making it explicit is not a problem.
Exactly. Okay. So we will do that. Thank you, Sheila,
Thanks
for
for the
bringing that up.
opportunity.
All right, so that brings us to 4710 R2. Thank you. Nothing there. 47,
A few years ago, we used both unweighted and weighted average as well, right? And so should the last sentence include weighted average as well?
It's our practice.
Yeah.
we include both on that?
Weighted, unweighted, that's what I
Are we
thought.
sure?
Is that what we do now?
I thought we decided a few years ago that we were going to do both.
I think we were doing both around the 10% for graduation, remember the whole
Right.
concept?
Yeah, I don't think it was for
remember it on the
calculating
We'd
that.
have to double, we should probably investigate and
Well,
see
that
what's
should-
actually on the transcripts. I will follow up with Karen Milburn on that.
So do we want to send that to policy just to clarify and get
Yeah,
the
just so it
information?
doesn't get lost.
Yeah.
Yep, okay, that's a good question. Okay, 4712. 4714. 4714E. 4720.
4720. Oh, that was just a minor change, I'm sorry.
Okay. 4730. I wondered on this one where it says Board of Education supports the assignment of home learning. I wondered if we would not want to actually say the Board of Education supports, but does not mandate the assignment of home learning. Because I mean, many teachers don't think it's appropriate and we don't require it. But it almost sounds like by saying that we support it, that we're requiring it. I don't know what people think about that.
That way.
You don't read it that way?
No.
No? People are comfortable with the current language?
I didn't read it that way either.
Sheila?
Well, I could just weigh in from the teacher's perspective and probably from an equity perspective, that I know a lot of teachers who do not assign homework is because if we have certain students whose life situations do not provide an opportunity to get homework done at home, it's better off for their education for them to have the totality of their experience in the classroom and to make sure that learning will continue. So that's generally speaking the reason behind it, is that we can guarantee that learning is done in the classroom and not put an undue burden on students for whom it's not their fault if they don't have the ability or the situation or the time or the mindfulness at home to get that work done.
So I guess, yeah, the question is really whether we think the language is consistent with that concept or not consistent.
What if you, following the word students, just comma, if appropriate, comma? I think that's kind of what she was saying, is that it's not appropriate for everybody under all the circumstances. But that when it is appropriate, you would think it's fine. You're not supposed to prohibit homework.
Right. Are people comfortable with that?
Sure, because the next sentence says that,
What's that?
the next sentence says it's supposed to be reasonable, they could do it on their own, so if it's appropriate, they should be able to do it on their own.
Unless not necessarily doing it at home, doesn't mean they're gonna take it home and have it done there.
Okay. So everyone comfortable with adding if appropriate? Okay. Minor. Just a clarification. Okay. 4750. 4760.
4750, I'm sorry, Bob.
Oh, sorry, too fast.
This is gonna need to go to policy committee. Dean has suggested we need to revisit the language around promotion, because we really don't talk about it in the policy, and this is NISBA says it's a required policy, so we might want to just take a look at the language.
Okay. All right, that goes to policy. 4760, from the makeup opportunities, which is, we were just referring to this a few minutes ago. 4770.
There are some proposed changes to 4770. I don't know if you might consider it minor. It's in the first paragraph. This guide, instead of saying provided, say available online, because it's no longer handed out, distributed in paper copy.
So this guide is available online.
Online.
Instead of provided.
And then in the next sentence, additional copies are available. It's actually in the main offices of all secondary schools, not the counseling office. And then in the third paragraph, Karen, there's just a little typo, maybe should be a space, may be.
We're not talking about typos.
Well, I think we're doing this one anyway.
Yeah.
In the second paragraph,
Okay.
the last part of it, may be made.
First?
Maybe.
So-
Maybe.
So I think, yeah, let's send that to first read.
Thanks.
So I just apologize, I gotta go back once.
Oh, okay.
4760, where it says student code of conduct, it should say district code of conduct.
Okay.
First paragraph.
Gotcha. And the very last line of the first paragraph, I think that's minor. Everyone comfortable
Yeah.
with that? Make no change? Okay. So now let's go from 4760, jumping 4770, 4771. Early graduation. 4773. Again, this, I just had a question which doesn't relate to the policy, but I would just be curious, and you can, for the information in the future, about how, on an annual basis, how many commencement credentials we issue for students with disabilities. So if we can just get that information at some point. Okay, and then 4810.
In the last paragraph, it says, with no position being espoused by the teacher as the only one acceptable. I think we need something more even-handed about that, because I don't think the teacher should be taking a position for or against the positions in these controversial, or what are they, controversial matters,
Okay.
or even ranking them. proposing ranking them, and this one says this is the best one. This addresses a teacher saying this is the best one, but I think you want something that's more across the board, not either promoted or denigrated.
All right, let's send it to policy to review the language, see if we can come up with something we think is more acceptable. Brings us to 4821, school celebrations and observances. Anybody? We shall celebrate this, the last one tonight. Okay.
Not bad.
All right. A lot of work for policy committee. That brings us to the superintendent's report.
Okay. There were 2 written reports that were submitted for your review. Are there any comments or questions on either of those reports? Okay. Then just a few informational items, some things we need to get feedback on, and a handful of reminders. If you remember, around this time last year, we had a solar company that approached us. Their name is Invenergy, I believe. Is that?
That's
is
a
that
different one. Yeah, actually, last year was Helios that had approached us. It was a different one.
Yeah, and if you remember, they are proposing a project that's going to expand into Rush. If you remember, you took action last year to opt out of what would have been an automatic exemption for them, which gives us the ability to negotiate with them, if you will. So they've reached out to us about possible negotiation, and we just want to make sure that we have your permission to enter into negotiations with them, and then we would in turn present a proposal to you for consideration.
Which, of course, we could accept or reject.
Right.
So, any dissension to that idea? Okay.
Okay,
Fair enough.
and we will enter into conversation with them. As Andy reminded us, this is sort of conference season as well as budget season, and NISBA is going to be coming up. Nurlan is going to be presenting with a team around best practices in supporting English language learners. And May is going to be a part of that presentation too. She's going to be introducing Nurlan and Company, so looking forward to that at the NISBA conference. Other than that, just some reminders. This is Spirit Week. So the food truck rodeo is going to be tomorrow, I believe,
Yes.
at 5 p.m. And the Power Puff game is going to follow at 6 o'clock. If you don't feel like cooking tomorrow, then come for the food truck rodeo. There'll be a lot of good eats there. Just a reminder, Friday is a non-attendance day for students. It's professional development day for teachers, superintendent's conference day. The homecoming game is going to be on Saturday, kickoff at 1 p.m. And we have one person who will be going into the Hall of Fame, and that will be announced at halftime. And then school will be closed Monday as part of Columbus Day weekend, and just wanted to put a plug in for Breakfast with Bo. Again, something new that we're trying to get some positive interaction with parents and create an opportunity to have some conversation with parents, community members, and Nurlan's going to be co-hosting with me for the first time around. And that's going to be on the 21st at 7:45 a.m. right here in this room. And that concludes the superintendent's report.
Very good, thank you very much. That brings us to board member reports, starting with the School Board Association Labor Relations Committee.
Yes, we heard a presentation on high deductible health plans and how they are a slow but steadily growing option that people are taking advantage of. About 900, I think, in the area, employees enrolled in high deductible health plans. How they can make financial sense for districts, how they can make sense for families, of course, depending on their own situations, melding with HSAs and such. And it was an interesting conversation.
Okay, great, thank you. The Equity and Inclusion Steering Committee.
That group has been meeting for a good 2 years and making some really, really great progress. Been working with the Warner School of Education, formulating different questions. They pulled together a lot of data. There was some teacher focus groups end of May, beginning of June, with conversations with small groups of teachers, asking them questions about equity and inclusivity within the district. Right now, the committee has, in their emails, questions for a survey for families. So we have to give some feedback by Friday on that so that we can get the surveys out to families. Because the group felt it was important now to go to the next level, reach out to our families and hopefully some of our students to get some feedback from them. And once all the data is pulled together, we can really pull together the plan that will be coming forward to the board about what we need to do here in the near future. I believe we talked about having the U of R group come and talk to the board at some point to talk about our definitions and some of the work that we've been done. So I think once we get past that survey, that'll be happening. They're actually coming to DPAC on Thursday night.
Talk about the family survey.
To talk about the family survey. So to get that out to all the schools so that they're aware that it's coming, and we'd like to get as much participation on that as possible. There was even conversation about how do we reach out to the families of different languages, how are we going to be able to make it accessible to them, you get the information out to them, so they're working on that piece. To have it translated, see what we can do, because we want their point of view, because that's the whole point, is the inclusivity of all of the different languages, cultures that we have within our district. Anything you want to add to that, May? Because we both go to it, and it's just such a great meeting that, you know, the piece that I think that some of the folks in the group have felt like we haven't been moving fast enough. But our last meeting, we had conversation about all the things we've been reading and all the conversations and the little bits that different people within the group have been taking and already using, that I think the group began to see there is work, there is progress that is happening. And part of it has to be small like this, because you want everyone to become comfortable enough to buy into what it is our priority is. And if you just throw it at everybody, it will not be successful. So these small pieces really seem to be creating a lot of energy and a lot of excitement about this priority in the district. So, you know, there are just a lot of different people on it and different points of view, and everyone, I think, came away feeling much better this last meeting that work is happening and it's going to get done, and we're leading the way. I think that was the other piece they were excited about. We're leading the way.
Okay, very good, thank you. The New York State School Board Association Board Officers Academy.
It was very informative. It was, Bob and I spent the day, and just looking at how different bodies, the governance of the board and the function, do a great job. Just looking at the ethics and looking at expenses. One thing that we said that we were going to do is look at forming a little more enhanced board orientation packet. So we're going to start looking at that. But overall, it was a great conference. They also focused a little bit on mental health and kind of look at the workshops. networking with some of the other board members, and I got to participate into a focus group during lunch, which was pretty nice. And just looking at how we overall work as a team, and I think we do a great job at that. So it was a very good and successful meeting, I felt.
It was very affirming, no question
Yeah.
about it. All right, the Henrietta Youth Asset Team.
Okay, that was me again. Great to see all the enthusiasm from all these students. They're from grade 6 to the high school. Very active group. They decided on the September 30th what kind of, what they wanted to do for Make a Difference Day. And they had varying ideas, working with Golisano Children's Hospital to working with Saving the Turtles, making some posters. They wanted to explore topics like social justice, racism, really engage it in such a safe environment. I love it when you go because you put your phone in a basket and you kind of sit and you interact with children or people. It was great. And they also had a meeting yesterday on the 7th, and they decided that they were going to definitely do Make a Difference Day, and they're going to make bags for Golisano Children's Hospital, and they also made these little trick-or-treating booths to help with the trick-or-treating at Tinker Park. And they did like a speed dating where they got to know other people. They lined up and they just talked to other students and other children, and it was pretty good. It was a great meeting, and they meet again in November. But they are very active. They do a lot of volunteering in the Parkinson's Walk, the Tinker Festival, Holiday or Halloween Parade, the Monster Scramble, Make a Difference Day, hamster ball races. Could be interesting. So that should be fun to watch. And then they have a holiday party at Tinker Park. So very active group, and it's all student-based, and it's pretty exciting to see.
Great, very good, thank you. The County School Board Association Legislative Committee, I did circulate the minutes to everyone. I think I forgot to do it until today, but hopefully everyone got them, or you got them twice, because I couldn't remember if I had already sent them, and I couldn't find one that I did. So you either got it today or you got it twice today included. The two things that primarily we talked about were just finalizing the legislative proposals for the year, things that will be talked about in Albany. And then there was a lot of discussion about concern about foundation aid, and the Senate is working on, the Senate's holding a series of hearings around the state about foundation aid, and seems very interested in trying to work on the formula and change the formula. There's some fear that that could adversely impact districts such as ours that are not viewed as high needs, depending upon what the base year becomes and what. So there was just a lot of discussion about that issue and whether or not safe harmless would be included, and the fact that we want to make sure in our lobbying that we emphasize, pardon me, that we like the idea of fixing the formula, but safe harmless is really important to make sure we don't end up losing state aid as a result. The board president's meeting, the bulk of the meeting was discussion with some new board presidents about how to deal with difficult board members, which is fortunately not an issue.
You can teach a master class on that, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, with you, James, but fortunately that's not an issue for us, but it was an interesting conversation for a number of people. District Safety Committee.
Let's see if you say that after I'm done with my report.
Oh, good point.
No, it was a great meeting. Ken Nelson and David Kay said that the vestibules are ahead of schedule right now, and they think they'll have them done by April break if they stay on track. Geraldo talked about the summer feeding programs, and it went well. They hope to reach more kids and hope to do it again next year. Shirley said they have their first emergency evacuation at Sherman coming up on 10/25, and she said they find it really helpful to have these evacuations because they're finding out all sorts of things that they wouldn't have otherwise. She gave some specific examples of some of the things they have found out. Jill said that the district is now Narcan certified site, and they can administer and train, and I think she said they can hand out Narcan to people who needed it, which was something she was very proud of and should be. The fire district said that, first of all, they shared that they have won a national safety award, and they attribute some of that to being part of the safety district here, so they think that that has something to do with it as well. So they wanted to share that news. But they said kudos to the fire district, I'm gonna say it again because they mentioned it there, to a great job that the Webster Fire, they said everyone did such a great job. And they couldn't say enough about that. The fire inspections went well, and they're going to continue visiting in the schools weekly, but now they're going to add, because they want to continue to build that support between the staff and the students, they're going to start showing up at all the sporting events now too. It's good to have some extra EMS there, isn't it? Mike Dinsmore specifically brought up that he thought at the schools they should be doing lunchtime drills. He thought it would be beneficial because of the staff turnover, or the cafeteria monitors, that they don't necessarily have the most up-to-date information on what should happen during a drill, as with substitutes and that. So Chris said he was going to be talking about that. I think they had a meeting the next day and they were bringing that up. And while he understood that, he said it's really the principals that make the decision, and it really is a hard time to have them and explain why that was difficult. But he was definitely bringing it back that next day. Mike Palladino wanted to give kudos to Bonnie and her staff because he said they have been consistently asking for more and more safety training. So they're asking for a bunch of stuff and they're getting it because they've been asking, and he did give a big shout out to them. And Chris talked about Safety Week went well, everyone's been doing well. Mike said that he's done his 3rd safety audit, checking out the grounds, doors, etc., and they're fixing the minor things they found, but everything's been great. And he's changed up his, where they used to do the dummy drop and then they find out how people respond in that emergency. He's changed that up and he's been bringing an AED with him. He demonstrates it, lets people touch it and practice it so that they're more familiar and more comfortable. They're not just afraid because someone drops a mannequin and then they panic. So he'd rather people were comfortable with the equipment, and that's probably a good way to go. And then they said that the sheriffs now will have fobs to the building, so they don't have to wait for an administrator to get there, so they can get right in. They'll have access.
That's great.
Yeah, that is, isn't it? And then they did bring up the threats, and as they mentioned, they're still being handled. And Mike talked about some of the PBIS and positive ways kids are being taught responsibility with social media. Sheila had some good suggestions as what might be able to improve that situation, because she received a lot of phone calls with teachers that didn't know. Not all the teachers got the message because they work in more than one school, first of all, so there has to be some sort of way to reach all the people that would be at that building so they're aware. And she had a couple suggestions. I think Chris said he was bringing to that meeting too, if I remember. So you may have already heard about them. And then I think that was it for the safety meeting. That was it.
All right, thank you
Good
very
meeting.
much. The NISBA Area 2 Proposed Resolutions meeting.
It's always a fun time there. You know, it was really great with all your sheets. You know, we were all pretty much in agreement with all the resolutions, and I get to that meeting and there was not agreement on those resolutions.
Wow.
I was kind of surprised by it, but then as we dissected some of them, some of it we forget. We're suburban. This is a 4-county meeting, and they're out in the middle of farm country, and it's all different for them, some of these resolutions. Even one of them, I thought it was kind of interesting. It was about supporting the requirement that local school districts continue to make determinations as to the substantial equivalency of education delivered to non-public schools. One of the districts there was talking about, they have a lot of Mennonite families in their area, and how difficult that is to, because culturally, how the effect that has on it, and Mennonite families have said, well, you know, we're your good neighbors and we pay taxes even though we don't use your school, and this is our religious school, and they only teach students up to 8th grade and then that's it. So there was a lot of discussion about some of these, and I thought it was quite interesting. The piece that's very helpful is that I have your sheets, if there were any comments or not, and then it helps me, you know, so when I get to the business meeting, some of these are going to have some conversation I was not expecting. There were also 5 resolutions that were handed in late. It is unlikely that they will make it to the floor because there's also the resolutions that were not supported, and those will probably have a first and a second to have them reintroduced. By the time we get through all those, we'll never make it to the ones that were late, and they were kind of interesting anyway, so. And some of the comments about some of the resolutions that people were upset about, you know, they were looking at some of them as unfunded mandates, and where are we gonna get the money for some of this? Or some of it should be already in your policy, in your code of conduct, like the vaping and that kind of thing, so. After 3 hours, some people wanted to continue, and the rest of them were like, we're done.
All right,
So.
very good,
But it's a great group, I like going to it.
very good. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
The District Wellness Council.
That was earlier this afternoon. So, we had some new people there. May had text earlier, we weren't sure if parents were allowed to come, so we had asked, and luckily she called, I'm sure some of you got phone calls. And just to make it known that anyone in the community can come, she said, so it is open to everyone. I didn't
Maybe
know.
that we can put something out,
Say
because
yes.
a couple of parents texted and asked if they could go. I didn't know, I told them to call the admin, so, building here, so that's what they did. But we didn't see anything posted, like, about the date or who should come and who should not, so I thought maybe that's something we could see.
Yeah, so Geraldo went over that the District Wellness Council actually falls under food services, even though it says district, and he gave a whole bunch of reasons for that, which is why he runs it with Jill. What did he say? He said, well, before I forget, the first thing, I know I was trying to remember what they said earlier. They talked about sharing tables, because we know we've seen that all over Henrietta Highlights and everywhere else on Facebook recently, and he wanted to clarify again, and I know I said this last year, I'm probably going to say it again next year, that there can be no food sharing tables here, period. First of all, for people who have allergies, obviously we don't know what else is in those things that people are putting on the table, but more importantly, it's not allowed here. And I think first he said Monroe County, then he said New York State, so I don't know, but either way, it's not here in Monroe County. So for several reasons, because they don't know where the food's been, even if it's coming an apple, because someone asked about the fruit, they don't know where that apple's been, they don't know, you can't reserve fruit that's already been served, they said, but you don't know if that person washed their hands before they put that apple up there, you don't know what the apple's touched before it went to the table.
Or someone put something in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there was reasons why they couldn't have it. There was actually several reasons. He said it's considered a health code violation, so they absolutely can't have that done. And he wanted to clarify that. And then plus food has to be served at a certain temperature. They talked about, that there's, I can barely read my writing, so I didn't have a chance to rewrite it. So they said, talking about removing or adding alerts, usually you have to have a doctor's note, so like when someone has a food allergy, for example, they can't have something. They have to have a doctor's note to get that, but they also have to have a doctor's note to remove it, so they can't take the parent's word and say, okay, well, he's not allergic to chocolate anymore, and just start serving, not that they serve chocolate, I should probably say fruit of some sort. But they have to have a note, they can't simply say they can have it just because the parent takes it. So they have to have a doctor's note either way. That was good to know. They have a new app that's out that he says isn't quite ready to be used, but he's ready to go, but it has to go through a few other processes first, but it's called Meal Viewer. And so parents can look over each product that is sold in our cafeterias, and they'll get all the nutritional value. And I guess the nurses, which I had not known previously, especially for people who are diabetic, but they have all the values in the nurse's office, so this will save them that trip. The nurses will have access, everyone will have access. He said you could get it right on the computer. And so it'll tell them everything they need, how many carbs or whatever else is involved. So he's really excited about that. And the parent actually asked about vegetarian choices, because she said that her daughter is now vegetarian at Roth and all her friends are vegetarian, and she was asking about what other things could be served because the kids don't tend to eat. So he went on to explain that you can't just serve something that doesn't have meat because it has to meet the USDA guidelines, and a lot of those don't, such as tofu doesn't meet those guidelines. So it's very specific as to what they can serve and what they can't, so it kind of makes it a little bit difficult. But he is serving things that they can have. You can't make the kids eat it, but they do have options. Let's see. Ken wasn't there, but Jill said on his behalf, they're moving all the leftover stuff out of Good Shepherd to make room for the Henrietta food cupboard. They're not sure when it'll be available, but they're really excited about having access to the kids and their family, having food when they might not have it otherwise. I met Diane today, which was very nice, and she said her title was changed, and she really likes it from when she was hired, the Wellness and Equity, so she really likes that. She said she's taken proactive measures in regards to mental health. I think she said she has either 5 or 6 in-services coming up by the end of December. That's a lot. So she said she's only been here 5 weeks, but she feels like she's been here 5 months and she's jumping in, feet first. She's really loving it, she said. She said they did a survey with the counselors and social workers to find out the strengths of the department, and they're looking for consistent, holistic approaches. And she really wants to, she was already talking to Barb Christensen, who obviously is one of the outside resources with the drugs and alcohol, and was setting up some stuff with her. And I think, so speaking of Barb Christensen, she talked about the vaping, and we talked about the ban on the vaping, the flavors. She said that the one thing that you might see in schools is that there may be an increase of kids using the vaping because the people who are selling them, they discounted them so much that kids are stockpiling them, so we might see that a lot in the next, at least, short time. And then there's something new out, but I can't remember what it was called, and she didn't really have a lot of information on it, so I didn't really write that down. And she said the myth is that unfortunately a lot of kids and their parents think that the vaping is safe, and it's really only the products that are with THC that's causing these young people to be hospitalized and now several deaths. However, it's a myth. It's with both the products that have THC and without THC. They don't really know what that is limited to, so she wants to make sure that people are aware that the illnesses are not only, I guess the other thought was that it's from the illegal dispensaries. It's from both illegal and legal, they found out, so she wants it to be known that they don't have it quite down yet. So it can be illegal, legal, it can be with THC, without THC. And I think that was it. That was pretty much it.
Thank you very much. All right.
Bob, you missed you missed MPAC?
Oh.
Impact, yes.
I certainly did. I apologize. Multicultural Parent Advisory Council, MPAC. Didn't mean to skip over it.
No,
I crossed it off
okay.
by accident.
It's okay. It was a short and sweet meeting. We did introductions for new people who joined and existing members. There was shared life experiences and life stories to build connections between the members. We talked about the opening of schools and workshop ideas for next meetings, and we talked also about ideas of how to get the kids more involved, giving back to their communities, in school and outside of the school. So that was it. Is that everything?
All right, very good. Now, in a second, we'll do the board meeting recap and preview. We may be going back into executive session. If we have information, we have some. Sorry, so we will not formally adjourn the meeting. We'll instead go back to executive session, and we'll have to come back out to adjourn the meeting after that. But let's do a recap and preview.
Okay. Spirit Week coming up. Our Spirit Week this week at the high school. Tomorrow on the 9th, there's a food truck rodeo followed by the most entertaining powder puff game. Homecoming is this Saturday the 12th. We have a visit coming up at Winslow on the 17th, and we have the breakfast with Bo on the 21st. Very exciting events. And we also have our conference coming up on the 24th through the 27th here in Rochester.
Okay, very good. I will, at this point, accept a motion to resume executive session, moved by James and seconded by Nikki.
Sorry, James.
Any discussion? To continue this discussion of the student appeal. All in favor of resuming executive session, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, nay? Okay, so we will go back, and then after that, we will just come back very briefly to adjourn the meeting. So I don't want people to feel they have to stick around for that, because there will be nothing else occurring other than the adjournment. So I think at this point, it would be beneficial probably to conclude our streaming of this particular meeting, because all we'll be doing afterwards is a quick adjournment. So there's not really a need to continue streaming. But thank you all for joining us online tonight. So let's go back in the other room, and then we'll come back briefly afterwards.
Hold on.
No, I. They don't.